Welcome to Coffee with Kelly. Welcome to our latest podcast episode. I'm your co-host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go. And as always, I'm joined by my colleague, Kelly Moore, who brings a wealth of experience to the table when it comes to school safety. With over 30 years of experience, including the role of commander at the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office, Kelly's passionate about educating schools on everything safety. In this episode, we delve into two crucial topics for schools: building partnerships and process improvement and accountability. We highlight the importance of establishing strong relationships with community partners, including fire, rescue, police, hospitals, mental health services, and others, to enhance communication and coordination in emergency situations. We also discuss the need for schools to have clear and effective processes in place for responding to emergencies, as well as the importance of ongoing evaluation and feedback to ensure that the process is effective and up to date. Additionally, we emphasize the importance of accountability and clear roles and responsibilities for all team members, as well as regular training and drills. Throughout the episode, we share practical tips and strategies based on real-world experiences and best practices to help listeners improve school safety and build stronger partnerships in their communities. Whether you're a school safety team member, staff member, SRO, teacher, or community partner, this episode is a must listen. Join us now as we talk more about school safety. Good morning, Kelly. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I've already actually finished my coffee, so I'm ready to go.
Are you ever really finished with coffee?
That's a true statement. I usually drink coffee all day, so.
Yeah, it's more for me, almost like a habit. I need coffee in my hand or around.
Yes.
And then at some point I just stop drinking it, but I always have it around.
I'm convinced that coffee just runs through my veins at this point.
I think it's one of the primary required liquids of life.
It's amazing that something so good can come from a bean. That part just amazes me.
A bean that we grind up into dust.
Yeah.
So we're drinking coffee mud.
I should find out where coffee started. Like where did it start that someone thought, hey, let's grind up this bean, and then
I think it was South America.
Was it?
I think so. Uh-huh.
Wild.
What do we got going today?
Well, I guess we're talking about how schools can basically reach out for help, and then in regards to reaching out to specific partners.
Right. So we're really looking at having build culture, right? That school safety culture, and this is just a part of that and continuing that. Right. And so part of the safety culture is putting a good team together. And a lot of people, automatically when you say, get a safety team together, and they go, okay, I'm going to pick the assistant principal, the counselor, the psychologist, maybe the dean of students, that kind of person, those kind of people. Right. But really the safety team is bigger than that. Right. And so when we look at building a good safety culture, you got to start with a good team. And we go into this in the two most recent blogs that we've posted. And what we're really talking about is a good team has a common interest. We talked about common values and behaviors and so forth in the last blog and podcast. But what we're really talking about is those values that we have and the common goal, how we are going to achieve them, understanding that each member of the team brings something different so that you can attack that problem from all these different areas and perspectives to help you perform better. So when we're talking about building a safety team, we're not just talking about the people at your school. You may have a safety team that consists of just school people. But when you're talking about the team itself, the full safety team for the district or your school, you need other partners, external partners, people that have expertise and special skills, people like law enforcement, fire department, hospitals, mental health services, community services, faith-based groups and facilities and things like that. Community facilities that you're going to need access to during an emergency as shelters or reunification sites or things like that.
Almost kind of reminds me of the phrase, it takes a village.
It does, right? And, a lot of people say that it takes a village, but do they actually reach out to the village, or do they reach out to their community, their own tight little community? And, one of the things that we've talked about is nobody that I'm aware of, I'm sure there's a unicorn out there somewhere that exists, where I got into education with the understanding and desire to protect the students. Very few people in this education industry said, you know what, I'm going to be a safety person. And so that's kind of there's this expectation, right, about when as a parent, I bring my kid to school, there's this expectation that once I get my child to school, that you're going to keep them safe and return them to me at the end of the day safely, right? And that means something different today than it did 50 years ago, right? Or even 30 years ago. But I'm not sure that we understand the new expectation. I know that the parents have an expectation. It's the same expectation. How you keep them safe is completely different. So now we have to step out and start looking at who has those skills and the experience and the knowledge and the ability to teach me as a school official what I need to do, what I need to focus on. How do I accomplish that? How does those partners fit into those three pillars, and how more specifically can they help us with the prevention, the mitigation, the response, preparedness, recovery phases of our emergency plans? How can they help us? And are we on the same sheet of music? If nothing else, when I press the big red button to have somebody come help me, do I understand what they want me to understand? Do I understand what they're going to do? What are their expectations of me? And what are my expectations of them? Am I going to press the red button and just wait for somebody to come help me? Or I'm going to press the red button and take immediate action to isolate, inform the responders, maybe administer first aid to people who I can, those types of things. What am I going to do? What are the expectations? What are my responsibilities?
One question that I have for you, Kelly, is how often would someone from a school, if they're trying to reach out to, let's say, the police department for some direction, advice, whatever, right? How often would they run into a situation where that department would just be like, we don't have time for you, or whatever the excuse is?
Yeah, they'll make time for you, especially in today's work. The key to this is understanding who you need help from, right? So I think we've talked about this previously. So I tell you that I'm a retired law enforcement officer, right? So that comes with, depending on your perspective, that comes with a lot of preconceived notions as to what I am and what I did. And most or some of them are correct, those assumptions. Many are incorrect. And why I say this is look at the number of different law enforcement agencies we have. We have police departments, sheriff's department, constables, FBI. Most states have a version of the FBI. We have narcotics, whole agencies that do nothing but narcotics enforcement, drug enforcement administration. Most states have some version of that as well. Most police agencies have a unit that does that. We have all these different aspects of law enforcement. So I do this in jest because I have a lot of respect for the FBI, but the fact of the matter is an FBI agent isn't the same as a police officer or a deputy sheriff that is that initial response person, right? That when we go into an active shooter, unless it's a very unique situation, you're going to have your local law enforcement, whether that's a police department or sheriff's department, maybe a state agency like a highway patrol or state police, depending on what they call them in your area. But very seldom is it going to be a federal agency that's going to be the first one there. So their perspective is different than ours. We look to the federal agencies for guidance and stuff because they have that ability to do the research that we do not. So we look at them, but to be the actual ones that are there on that first response and make it there within that first critical 8 minutes of the incident period is very unlikely. So the reason I say that is because not only are our agencies different, but the people within those agencies are different. So if you say, go contact a law enforcement agency, they'll be willing to help you. Not everyone there has the ability to help you because you have from, and I'll take my agency, pretty typical, from people who graduated the academy yesterday to people who have 50 years of experience, right? And that experience varies. You could have people who spent 50 years on patrol, writing tickets, doing traffic reports, responding to calls for service, those types of things. But then you also have people who spend an awful lot of time in what I call the specialized law enforcement, and that's other than those response patrol people. So like detectives, narcotics, gang enforcement, DARE or SROs is a specialty, much more of a specialty now than it was when it first started. But we also have people who have supervision, management. We have managers who have experience with emergency management, which is a whole separate animal. And so you need to look for those people who can help you plan, who can help you if you as a safety team and your partners are all sitting at the table and you decide this is what we're going to do, then you need people there that can take that back to their respective agencies and create policy procedures and standard operating procedures that will force that agency or allow that agency to train their people to abide by the plans and procedures that you as a team have come up with. So are they going to say, we don't have time for you? They might say, we don't have time for you right now, but let's make an appointment for next week. And I go to this in the blog, and this is usually the toughest first step is like any other partnership, you have to take that first step. You can't sit back and wait for the fire department to come to you and say, hey, how are your safety plans? Do you need any help with that? They're not that type of agency. Do they have experience? Can they help you? Absolutely. But most of the government agencies, and I'm trying to think of, there's very few, I'm sure there are, are proactive. They're all response agencies. How do you get a police officer? You ask for it by dialing 911, right? In a school setting, if you have an emergency communications platform like Crisis Go, you press a button and it comes. They don't just stop by and say, hey, what do you need help with today? Right? So you have to ask. And so you have to go and you have to ask the right people and say, hey, I'm so-and-so from the school district. I'm putting together a safety program plan for our district and our schools. Who do I need to talk to because I need help? I'm venturing into an area that I have very little expertise or knowledge in, and I think you guys would be a good part of that. So can we work together on that? And they're going to find that person, right? So in my agency, that would have been somebody who was likely a lieutenant or higher because they're managers. And most of the people below that rank, sergeants, senior deputies, corporals, and patrol deputies, those are all response people. They're going to go to attack the problem. And once you start getting into the ranks of management, then you're going to start managing those incidents, right? So they're the ones that are going to have the experience on planning, execution. They're the ones that are going to be able to go back to the agency and develop policies and procedures and make sure that everyone gets trained in that kind of process so that your plans actually work the way that you want them to work. And they're going to be able to find some flaws in your plans, right? Theory is much different than application. And we can talk about that for an entire podcast, and we've talked about it before. Teaching is different than learning. And I can go in and teach somebody, but we need to make sure they learn it. And that whole process is starting off with a good basis for plans. And how do you hold somebody accountable? You have policies behind it saying this is our policy. And if you do it contrary to the policy, you violate the policy, there's repercussions for that, right? So we can work through that, but you need to have those people there. It's the same with the fire department. The fire department is obviously different than the police department. They're much cooler than the police are. Ask them, they'll tell you. That's just a little poke at my friends in the red trucks. I love those guys. I really do. I have a lot of respect for them. But they run most of their day-to-day business by the incident command system. So I'm not going to go into incident command today. That's for another podcast. But if you have any idea what the incident command system is, you have an incident commander, you have operations section, you have a planning intel section, you have a logistics section, and you have a finance administrative section. So one of those sections they have is planning and intel. Ask for that person. Ask for the person who can help you plan. And in the fire department, whether it's a volunteer fire department, a full-time professional fire department, or a combination of the two, or both, because some agencies or some school districts have professional firefighters, and then they have some schools in more rural areas that would have maybe volunteer fire departments. But they're all going to be pretty much the same, and ask for that person that can help you with planning. Hospitals are pretty much the same way.
One question that I have is, let's say, for example, you're a district or a school that's in an area that's kind of known for to have a issue with drugs.
Uh-huh.
Let's say you're in that kind of area. It's just been a problem.
Yep.
When you go to contact your law enforcement for these plans, is it better to say, hey, we want someone to help us plan for preventing drugs coming into the school? Is it better to have someone very specific to that, or is it better just to have someone that's kind of more of an umbrella?
Yeah, so it depends on the agency, right? The size of the agency, rural, suburban, urban, and what they're going to, depending on your question, they might say that that's for this unit over here or whatever, right? While drugs is certainly an issue, and the collateral concerns for high drug areas can and do include gang violence, just drug territory violence and so forth, that can cause issues. And should you try to get them off your campus? Absolutely. But that's not typically something that the school is thinking about or discussing when they're talking about putting their safety team together. Huge safety issue. Recently, we had one of our customers who detected a young man coming to school with a gun in his backpack. And he was completely cooperative. He was obviously searched and taken to a safe place. The gun was removed, and they started talking about the gun, and he was completely apologetic. He had no intention of bringing that gun to school, but he lived in an area where he only felt safe walking to school with a gun. And don't ask me what he did with the gun during, because I don't know, but he had forgotten to take it out of his backpack. And so, is that an issue? Yes. And does it happen? Yes. And should we consider it? Yes. But we have more basic fundamental needs when we're talking in this context than the drug issues in the neighborhoods. But they'll send you to the right people. If that's your concern, they'll make sure that you get to the right person.
So in reading the first blog here, you have some overlapping areas where these agencies can help.
Yep.
So does that mean that they all have each individual parts in those areas, or is it like if one of those agencies doesn't have a specialized person, then you can just go to the next agency to help with this kind of area? So
Yeah.
for example, you have drills and exercises, map development. So basically, what I would think is that maybe the fire wouldn't have 100% coverage of map development, that they
Right.
would have a specific area in that, and then law enforcement would also have kind of their own specific area in
Yeah.
map development.
Yeah. So what you have to understand is every team member is going to come to the table with a different perspective. And that perspective is going to be based upon what they're responsible for and what their experience, training, knowledge, skill levels, skill sets are, and so forth, right? So under the umbrella of emergency plan development and review, they're going to be very helpful, right? But they're going to be looking at it from their perspective. Okay, this is great, but the fire department needs access to this, whatever that is, right? How do we get there? So that'll help through that. And then hopefully at the same meeting with the fire department, you have law enforcement. They all should be together at these meetings so they can give their perspective and input and make decisions based upon their needs and so forth, so that when you come together to finalize the plans, everyone understands the other person's perspective and they start thinking about the other person's perspective and so forth. So, and you're right. I purposely did in the blog, I listed several in the emergency realm of things, the response realm, that the fire department can help with essentially the same things that the police or law enforcement can help you with. Why? Because they're doing the same thing. They just do it differently, right? They'll help you with the plans, but they're going to help you with the plans from their part of the operation, right? So when you press that button, you don't only get the police department, you get the fire department, right? Even in a fire, most cases, law enforcement will send units to the school at a fire alarm because they have a function. What's that function? Maybe traffic control. Maybe there's some security issues that they can help with. Maybe they can shut down certain access points to maybe the parking lots and so forth to let the fire department in where they need to get to. So it's those types of things. You go through each type of incident, and when you're developing your plans and your response protocols, what does that mean to me as a law enforcement officer, right?
So it's definitely important to have all of these people at the table.
Yep.
At the same time.
At the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because if you have them at different times, then you're gonna miss out.
Yeah, and there are certain things that one agency is likely going to be better at than the other agency, even if they're doing the same thing, right? As an example, in the training portions, I put a couple of examples. Incident command system. Can the fire department and will they teach you incident command? Absolutely. In fact, they would love to do that because that's like...
It's like their jam.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. that's like their thing. Law enforcement, will they? Can they? Yes. Do they want to? Probably not, because they don't live their life under incident command. It's a whole different structure, but they're required by law, by federal law, to use the incident command, specifically as most things are with the feds. It's tied to funding. If you don't use it, you may not get reimbursed for expenses that you incur during an emergency, right? So the incident command is better taught and known by the fire department, but most police departments could do it if they wanted to, especially if they give you an overview as opposed to getting down and dirty into the what form needs to be filled out where.
So I asked the question earlier from kind of the first responder perspective of, their willingness to help, and I think you've answered that pretty well. So let me ask it in the other direction. Let's reverse it. In your experience, how often do schools and districts actually reach out for this type of help?
My experience has been little, but there are districts who have a fantastic relationship with one or both of the fire and law enforcement. If you have that kind of relationship, this part of planning should be very easily accomplished. But there's, especially with law enforcement, politics being politics, there's this thing with law enforcement, and there's schools that absolutely forbid law enforcement from coming onto their campus. In fact, recently after some events, there was a push in a lot of schools to remove law enforcement, the SROs and so forth, from the district. Now, I don't want to get into those politics, but I'll get into the relationship of that, right? So there's especially, a relationship has many facets to it, right? But we're talking about, even if it's between a school and a law enforcement school and a fire agency, we're looking at organizations. But what are those organizations made of? People, right? So if you spend a good portion of your time blaming law enforcement or the fire department or whomever, government or whomever, of not doing their job or doing it incorrectly or something like that, when they press the button, are you going to come? Yes. Is there going to be some effect of that relationship? Yes. So, and the reason I'm pointing this out is for this purpose only. If you understand your partners, you understand their limitations, what they're doing, what they're trying to do, how difficult their job is, and this is universal, you learn more about them, the less fear you have of them, the less disdain you have for them, and the more likely it is that you're going to get help from them. It's a relationship. It needs to be nurtured. It needs to be participative. And if not, then you're going to end up pushing the button. Well, let me ask you this. If you had a good relationship with your law enforcement and fire departments, and they were part of your safety team, actively participating in it, helping you set everything up, or you had a non-relationship or a bad relationship with them and you needed their help, under what circumstances would you rather press that button, that panic button or that 911 call?
Right.
Right. So, those are decisions I can't make for you, but I know which one I would want. I would rather have a good working relationship, whether or not I like that person, with the right person, right? That can help me do what I need to do to fulfill my obligation. And chances are you're going to learn a lot about the people, and maybe you're going to change perspective.
I've always thought that when it comes down to it, you probably have a lot more in common with someone than not. I think it's easy for people to find the differences and focus on that. But it's like, I bet you can find a lot more things you actually agree on. Like, for example, probably a very important one, is keeping your students safe.
Right.
I think we could probably all agree that, whatever you can do to keep your students safe, let's strive for that goal.
Yeah, let's do that. Right.
Makes
let's actually do that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But, so there's a lot of people who don't know where to start, right? Don't know where that partnership begin. And, in the blog, I kind of jokingly, not jokingly, whatever that's called, referred to that as kind of a dating relationship, right? You're trying to find your partner, because I go through my whole scenario with my wife and I, and how that partnership works. But it started with introductions. It started with conversations. It started with getting to know each other. It started with working together. And if you read the blog, you'll see there's lots of differences between my wife and I, huge differences. And we made it work, or we're still making it work because it's still ongoing, right? We're still working at it some 38 years later. And this is really no different than that. You're trying to find the perfect partner for a long-term relationship. that is mutually beneficial to everyone involved, right? And just in this context, we just need lots of people to help us who we trust. Because if you go to the second scenario where you don't have a relationship with somebody, you don't have time to hop on social media and say, hey, do you know who the best cop is to call? Because I'm having somebody shoot up my campus right now. You know what I mean? It's not like a plumber, but it's like a plumber. A plumber has a certain set of skills, but you want to know who a good plumber is before your pipes freeze, right? I mean, same concept. You don't want to spend the next 2 hours trying to find a good plumber. You want to be able to call plumber Paul and say, hey, Paul, sorry to do this to you. You know, this is Kelly. Oh yeah. Hey, Kelly, how's it going? Good. Except for my pipes burst because they froze. Okay. I'll be right over. As opposed to, hey, are you available? Not till tomorrow. I'm booked up. Right. Or not till next week. Today it's, could be 3-4 months before you get service.
Yeah.
Right. But it's that simple. You'd much rather have that person you can call and say, I need help. They know who you are. They trust that when you call that you actually need help and they're willing to help you. Right. In this context, if you don't have that previous relationship, that when you make that phone call, those people responding to your campus, if they don't know your plans, they don't know what your expectations are, they'll figure them out. But as they're figuring them out, it's going to take a lot longer. And we know how quickly these things are over, right? And we know how detrimental extending time can be to survival rates.
I would hope that in any, crisis situation that a school would not have to go down that route of trying to find someone to help.
For all of our listeners, right? I have a question, right? When was the last time your law enforcement agency came onto your campus, not related to a call and not an SRO who's there every day, but just took a tour to find out the layout of your buildings? Some people do that all the time. Most people don't. So when the person who responds to that initial call, you're likely going to get somebody who has never been on your campus before. Or if they have, it was to the office and that's it. Or they're writing a report in your parking lot late at night, but they're not walking around the buildings, or they're not doing, a guided tour saying, hey, here's our lock boxes with our keys in it. Here's our first aid. Here's our exit routes. If you go in here to the left, it's, you're going to find the chemistry labs or the science labs. And if you go to the right, you're going to find the computer labs and the cafeteria and the auditoriums and that stuff. That takes a half hour. But that's the type of relationship you want. You want them to come in and walk around your campus, even if it's full of people, saying, hi, how are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, I'm just taking a look. But you want to be able to do that. You don't want to say, oh, what are the cops? Why are they here? You kind of want them to be a normal site or not abnormal anyway, right?
Yeah, I would think that responding to an event would be a lot easier if you knew, every room like the back of your hand, every hallway, all that. Yeah.
Which of our listeners out there are schools are allowing law enforcement and fire to train together on their campuses for this type of event? And this brings up a political gap between legislation and reality. A lot of the schools are required to do a lot of things. They have a lot of mandates to keep our kids safe. In some states, that mandate is you shall have an active shooter drill that involves law enforcement and fire. The gap is none of the fire departments or police departments are mandated to do the same.
Interesting.
Right? So if law enforcement was, they'd figure it out and they would say, hey, we got a drill coming up. We should have a drill coming up this year. We haven't planned for it, and it takes some planning, it takes some effort to get that done. You can't just call us on Friday and say, hey, you guys want to do a training tomorrow, right? But if the school doesn't step out and say, hey, we're required to do this, can you help us put this together? Then it's likely not going to happen, right? Then some of the states that are mandating that aren't really holding the schools accountable. They will, not yet, but yeah,
they will when something bad happens.
Yep. Yeah, and that's always the case. That's the accountability factor, right? Is, I like to use this when we're talking about events and the reason we're doing all of this. At some point, you're going to need it for something, right? And we don't know what it is or when it's going to happen. But we put more effort into winning the football game than we do in protecting our kids, right? And let's talk about it in that context, right? Emergency planning and safety programs are preparing for the football game, going to practice, making sure everyone knows what they're doing, making sure everyone understands what their responsibilities are, and so forth. The big difference between emergency planning and football practice or basketball practice is football's teams, they know when they're going to compete against each other, right? And we don't know when we're going to have to use our skills. We don't know when that is. At some point, I've referred to this as, the test. The test doesn't care whether or not you prepared. SATs, ACTs, you have a test date. If you want to go to college, you take these exams, right? So you can prepare for that or you don't. The test itself does not care. The ACT doesn't care whether you answer that question right or wrong. The results will show whether or not you prepared for that test, right? So you choose. I
would much rather be prepared than not prepared.
You're going to be tested, so you may as well start.
All right, Kelly. So let's transition here a little bit. So let's say we've established our team. We've established who's going to help us with these plans. And so what's the next step there? How do we implement those processes and procedures, and how do we make sure that they are run well? And how do we make sure that the people within those groups are held accountable?
Yeah, so we're getting into the nitty gritty, right? So we put our plans together. Now we have to implement it. Look at, and people say, well, we haven't talked about putting plans together yet. We haven't, because plans are pretty individual. You have some standardized components, obviously, but we'll get into the nuts and bolts about putting plans together, drills and exercises in future blogs and podcasts. But right now we're talking about processes, right? So you went through that process. You got everybody together as a team and you worked through putting plans together. They're going to help you with the pieces that in this blog we're kind of skipping over, putting those plans together. So in order to do that and get those plans together, you probably went through some sort of problem solving process. I like to use it's kind of a 5-step process where you identify your problem, you define what that is, and you identify your resources. So identification. Then you determine your courses of actions, plan A, plan B, plan C, and so forth. Then you implement that plan. And implement it is making sure everyone understands what the plan is. They're trained on it. They're understand what they do, and they can show you that they can do it, right? As you're implementing the plan, you need to start working on observation of whether or not that plan is working the way that you envisioned it, right? Is it successful? And if it's not, then we need to look at it. If it can be tweaked or refined or revised to make it better, we should do that, right? So that's that observation evaluation period of your implementation. Then there's this transition to a new plan, right? And that transition is back to the beginning, right? Your transition, you observe, now you've identified a new problem or a new thing that needs to be worked on, and it becomes this cycle, right? So what we're talking about now is the improvement. This is where it's probably the second or third step in your process, your journey of 1,000 miles or tens of thousands of miles, however you want to call it, in this safety process. we have to improve. Every time we do something, we have to look at it and improve. What could we have done better? What did we learn from this? And so forth. So now we have to start implementing formalized process improvement plans and holding people accountable to those standards, because the plans, policies, systems, and stuff we've talked about before, they all have an expectation. They all set the expectations. They identify the responsibilities, who's responsible, and so forth. Now we have to hold people to those expectations. We have to hold law enforcement to it. We have to hold the fire guys to it. We have to hold our people to it. So if you're running drills and exercises, those are the things that we use to observe the actual plans in progress. So what we're doing now is seeing where we can improve. Look at it from a critical eye. And so in the military, law enforcement, we call those after action reviews. The product from those reviews is an after action report. The fire service typically often calls it a hot wash. I'm not really sure where that came from, but I think it's when everyone's hot after an incident and they're washing everything down, they start talking about it, right? But there's, many different names for this, but it's all doing the same thing. They're all trying to identify things that went correct. We were successful. Things that I call went wrong. A lot of people call it areas of opportunity and so forth, right? They soften the vernacular a little bit. But what we're looking for is, how do we improve? And then we have to identify what was the cause for that. Why did that go wrong? But here's an important step that a lot of people miss is, if something is going right or correctly or as planned, were we successful because we did it correctly, or did we get lucky?
This was my favorite part of this blog.
Right? If we're just getting lucky, if at any time somebody says, "Oh, I got lucky there," well, luck is not a strategy. Hope is not a strategy, right? You have to train or revise that luck factor out of it. If it was a policy or a procedure within you did exactly what you were expected to do, and then somebody said, "Wow, we were lucky there. We were lucky that this didn't happen." Well, then you have to, whatever that was, then you need to figure out how to mitigate that and how to correct that. And we go through these processes, and I can give you a quick example of why that is important in just a bit. But why we go in through this process more than anything is we want to get it right? Nobody expects everyone to be perfect. Nobody expects everyone to get it completely right. But we do expect people to start learning, and learning from other people's mistakes, learning from our own mistakes, learning from experiences, and so forth. That is why we look at every incident that has occurred over the past almost 24 years, right? And we're learning something every time. And unfortunately, we're not learning everything, from every event, right? We're picking out one or two things and we're saying, "Oh, they didn't do a threat assessment. If they'd have done a threat assessment, they would have got that guy and he wouldn't have attacked us," or whatever. But that's why motives are so important to people. Why, actions are so important to people. Inactions are so important to people, is because they want to shift the cause, or put blame on something other than what they did or didn't do. And I'm saying we should look at ourselves. We should look at why we were successful, how we were successful. We should look at why we were unsuccessful and why we were unsuccessful, and why aren't we doing it correctly now, right? We have the time now, hopefully, because you can't predict when the next one is. But we're seeing violence go up. And, obviously for political reasons, gun violence is at the top of everybody's list. But in that same time frame, we had a driver of a U-Haul bus plow, or U-Haul truck, I think it was, some sort of rental truck, that plowed over a bunch of people in New York City, right? So it's not just gun violence. There's violence out there, right? And so we have to look at those behaviors and so forth. The point is if we are constantly showing improvement, this is what I learned from these events. And these are the actions that I took to correct those issues. And I've shown constant improvement. First of all, your schools are going to be so much safer, so much quicker than they are today, right? Because you're going to have that culture. This is part of that culture, is correcting bad policy, correcting bad training, correcting bad plans, just constantly improving bad access, bad whatever, right? If you're correcting that, and if you're correcting things that you got lucky at, you should consider lucky bad, right? And if you're correcting that and you're documenting that and you're ensuring that those corrections are implemented properly, they go through that same process that we talked about earlier, then when the ultimately, if you have a bad incident, you're going to be sued, period. Just count on it. So how are you protecting your school districts from that? And if you can show a constant improvement, a starting point and a constant improvement, you're in a much better place. Am I going to say that you are completely protected? Absolutely not. Not a lawyer, although I do have one in the family. I'm not a lawyer, and I can't guarantee that for anybody. But I can say this: you're going to be in a much better position than if you don't, right? What's the worst thing you can have in a court case? All of your employees saying, I didn't know what to do. Or I was told this, but they did this. Or, it's confusion. Everyone should be very clear on safety policies. Everyone should be very clear on what they need to do during an emergency. Everyone should be very clear on the expectations and their responsibility, right? So that if I'm a judge or a prosecutor in some case, and I start bringing in employees of your district as witnesses to how negligent you guys were or weren't in your safety procedures.
That's going to go south real quick.
Real quick.
Yeah.
At some point, they're going to say how many zeros you want, right? And we started working on this when I was at my district because our high schools were completely accessible. One principal described her campus as 40 acres of freedom. So I said, yep, we're going to fix that, right? So we started working on that. And because if they're saying that in, tongue in cheek, and they're saying that, there's some truth to that, right? So we need to fix that. That's part of their culture, and we need to fix that.
I think it's really important. Kind of I'll call it the last stage, but it's really not the last stage, but in these 5 steps that you have here, and it's, adjusting your plan. And it's not just after you realize one thing, you're like, oh, adjust the plan, and then you just walk away from it. Like it's a constant thing. I think that's a really important point to make.
Right. It is. And the point is you have to follow through, right? And, currently, what's the biggest problem with emergency plans in our schools?
I'm going to guess accountability.
Okay. We could put it under that umbrella, I suppose. Nobody knows what it is. If you were to go to your school district and say, can I see, I don't need to open it. I just want to see see that you have a plan. They're going to pull a 3-inch binder off the shelf and say, here it is. Nobody knows what's in it. Nobody knows, they might know how to do a fire drill. Why? Because they've been doing those since I was a kid, right? But if I ask, okay, go to page 72, what does that tell me? What is the title? It's shelter in place. Okay. And I said, without reading it, what does it tell me? What does it tell you? Well, I don't know. Well, you should know what shelter in place means, right? Title's pretty much a giveaway, but what does that actually mean? What do you need to do while you're sheltering in place?
And that could be different for each.
Right. For each scenario. But so that would be a response, right? Why am I sheltering in place? hazardous materials. Oh, then I need to tape up the doors and vents and stuff. I need everyone to get down, depending on what the material is. I need to, figure out what the first aid for that particular material is and so forth, right? That's somebody who knows. If somebody says, oh, you just stay where you're at, they don't know, right? But it's in this 3-inch binder, and it's no good to anybody. Checklists, another thing. Should we have checklists? Absolutely. When do you use checklists? During training, so you know what the responsibility are. Can you pull out a checklist in response to an emergency? No. That's why we train. That's why we drill. That's why we go through exercises.
Checklist should be a second nature.
They're the foundation for the education and training and the skill development. But accountability, and the accountability is knowing what you're supposed to do. And then if you don't, then correcting that, making sure that everyone knows and it goes through. Oftentimes, we found this happening when I was in the sheriff's department. We'd make these huge decisions at the command level, and nobody would communicate that to everyone who needed to know it. Does us no good if nobody knows what we want them to do.
Confusion is never a good thing.
No, it's not.
Well, Kelly, I think this has probably been the most jam-packed podcast that we've had so far. I think it's a good thing. And definitely want to encourage our listeners that we do have blogs that you can pretty much read everything that we've talked about. A little bit more information there. You'll get to read, additional Kelly stories, and those are always fun to read and do add value to our conversations. So, Kelly, maybe just give me some final thoughts. What's the key takeaway for our listeners on today's podcast?
Key takeaways, right, is you're going to need help. Find out who has the best skills, the correct skills that you need. Develop strong relationships with them before you need those skills and expertise. Develop your good plans, have them help you understand the safety processes, the safety programs that you are required to have. Have them help you with your processes. In turn, you will help them with theirs. And once you start putting those plans into progress and you start implementing them and putting them into action, then make sure that you always have a review. You should have a review of every actual incident, every drill, every false alarm. You should be reviewing that to see if what happened, why it happened, was it successful? If it was successful, why? If it was not successful, why? And how do you correct that? And have that formalized process for improvement. 2 primary reasons for that. 1 is you always want to get better. And 2, it's going to help you protect yourself from future risk, whether that be liability or actual risk of an emergency. And, we took a long time to get here, but really partnerships are really the foundation of where we're going to go into next when we start talking about responses and preparation and management of these things. We've talked a little bit before about the initial response. That first few minutes will take care of itself. But then the incident, as we see time and time again, the incident is shut down for several hours. That whole area is shut down for hours. People are in lockdown, or they're in the shelter position for hours. Who's managing that? We'll get into that, but the foundation for that starts with a good safety program that's always wanting to learn, always wanting to improve, that was created by strong partnerships.
Thanks for tuning in to our latest podcast episode on building partnerships and process improvement for schools. We hope you've gained valuable insights on the critical importance of community collaboration and accountability in ensuring school safety. By establishing strong relationships with community partners and implementing effective processes, you can enhance communication and coordination in emergency situations and ensure that everyone knows their roles and responsibilities. We hope the practical tips and strategies we've shared in this episode will help you make a difference in your school community. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and hit that notification bell to get updates of future episodes. Feel free to leave a comment on what part of this episode was most impactful for you. We'd love to hear from you. On our website, crisisgo.com, you'll find the blogs we discussed and a complete portfolio of advanced alerting solutions for your school. Join us next time as we continue to explore the world of school safety.